So a living faith is more than just an intellectual exercise or an emotional response. In verse 19, he says, "You believe that God is one. You do well. Even the demons believe and shudder." James says, hey, it's possible to have knowledge or even right ideas about God and still not have saving faith. And honestly, if you're in my position, this is actually kind of a scary proposition for you. Like, he's saying you can have a lot of biblical knowledge and you can have right ideas about doctrine and still not be saved. He says, you believe in God, good, so do the demons. You know that, do you know who the most orthodox believers are? Well, they're not believers. The people that have the most orthodox understanding about God are the demons. Right? They know the right stuff. The demons themselves have been to the absolutely greatest seminary in the history of all learning. They all have. They've been in the throne room of God. They know God way better than I do in this body, that I ever will in this body. They know more about God than the greatest saint that has ever lived, and yet they're demons. Which means that some part of that has disconnected for them. Which is why it's possible to have a degree from a seminary and not be a follower of Jesus. I suspect I know a few people like that, honestly. You can be a New Testament scholar and write and teach about Jesus and the Bible and not care a thing about it. You can be a pastor in a pulpit preaching about Jesus, and you may not even know him. Now, understand what I'm not decrying getting knowledge. That's not what I'm saying. There is absolutely nothing wrong with getting all of the knowledge that you can get. In fact, next week, we're going to talk about how that knowledge plays itself out in our worship. But get all the knowledge that you can get. You should. Get all the biblical accuracy that you can. That's fine. It's good to do that. But James says you have to realize that having all of that knowledge, having all of that accuracy, does not necessarily qualify you to be anything more than a demon. The demons believe and they shudder. That word shudder means they don't just believe in God, they respect the power of God. They respect the greatness of God. They're scared to death of God because they know what he can do. So if that's true, then it's very possible for human beings to know that God is great, to believe that God is great, to even be afraid they'll be punished, and even alter their behavior and become a very moral, religious person. And yet all of that religion and all of that morality is really nothing but shuddering in fear. See, what are they doing? They're hedging their bets. Their religion is just fire insurance. That's all it is. But living faith is more than just an assent to some doctrinal statements. Faith is more than knowledge. Faith is more than knowing things about Jesus. And it's more than just an emotional response, too, at the same time. The demon's emotional response is shuddering. No, there's nothing wrong with an emotional response either. And there's nothing wrong with understanding doctrine and the nature of God, but you have to see that based on the evidence that James is giving us here of the demons, none of that proves that you have a trust in God at all. A person of saving faith will have these things, I'll say that, or at least they will be on a path to getting them. But a person who has these things does not necessarily have saving faith. Does that make sense? So knowledge or emotions by themselves are an insufficient sign of living faith. See, a religious life, and not a life of faith, but a religious life is a calculating life. It's a life simply just kind of adding things up, pluses and minuses, profits, losses, making sure that the ledger all balances in the end. And it's basically saying, I guess I better live like this in order to avoid that. And you make all of your decisions based on that, which is a faith in which, I've got to say, there can't possibly be life. If you're constantly weighing against what you've done or what you will do or what you might be or whatever, there's no breath in that. It has sucked all the air out of you. In other words, it's a dead faith. So James says, faith is evident. But even though it's evident, that doesn't mean that it'll be perfect. We got to make sure that we understand that as well in all of this. I sometimes hear Christians call into question someone's faith because they are imperfect. It always happens whenever some high-profile person puts their faith in Jesus Christ. They make a public profession of faith, and then they go and screw up, as they inevitably will do as sinners. And then we go, oh, see, I knew they weren't really Christians. But the Bible actually describes people of great faith with terrible flaws. All of them, from cover to cover. Terrible flaws. James gives us a few of them right here in this passage today. First, Abraham, verse 21. Was not Abraham our father justified by works when he offered up his son Isaac on the altar? You see that faith was active along with his works, and faith was completed by his works. James says, here is what faith being demonstrated looks like. Action. Abraham's faith was proven by his works, by what he did in being willing to sacrifice Isaac. See, it's all well and good to say that I trust you, God, but until Abraham went up on that mountain to sacrifice Isaac, even he didn't know whether or not he really had faith. Faith was completed, it was consummated, it was consecrated, it was shown fulfilled, however you want to describe it, in the action, says James. Now, I said a statement, even Abraham didn't know whether or not he had faith. Why didn't Abraham know? Well, if you know the story of Abraham, you know why he didn't know whether or not he had faith. Because he was a very flawed individual. He did tremendously bad things that if they were done in the social media age, he would have resulted in Abraham being completely canceled. The idea of him being the father of a great people, that's ridiculous. Do you know what he did? He denied that Sarah was his wife, abandoned her, and if you read the story, you understand this is what he did. He took a dowry for her from Pharaoh. I mean, this is atrocious. Who would do that to their wife? This is intentional action. This isn't, oh, I screwed up. He'd be completely, come on. But you know what he did? He did it twice. Don't pretend that's admirable. It's not. Do you know who knew his faults best? Abraham. He knew. And so that's why he needed this event to prove within himself that he actually did trust God. He needed his faith to be proven. He needed the action to show, yes, this is where I stand now. I am not that man I used to be. I'm changed. And now Abraham is held up as a paragon of faith because he did not withhold even his only son from God, is what the narrative tells us.